Hello and welcome to the Lardy Advent Calendar for 2024, and we are on to day 19. Let's open the window and see what we are being asked, we being me. Right, canter or gallop. How do you influence the pace or tempo of a game? Is this something the rules should create or something for the game organiser? Well, that's an interesting one. It's a big question, really. Are we talking about the influence on a game that we are playing or a game that is a set of rules? I suppose we'll never know. So, war games, like battles, have traditionally had their own tempo. You deploy on the table edge and advance to contact. It serves as a bit of a preamble to the game, really, allowing the players to watch their opponent and adjust their plans before the moment of contact, and then things get exciting. But actually, it's a very gamey process. It's not really very real, as anybody who's played Kriegspiel will know. Usually you find in a Kriegspiel, as I think you found in most battles in the modern world, that first point of contact often occurs before the general commanding knows what's happening, and then they have to decide whether the sounds they can hear from over the horizon are just patrols clashing, or is it their advanced guard running into a strong enemy force, and they're having to make judgment based on imperfect information. It's what games are all about, those decision-making opportunities. But this is really quite rare in the big battle tabletop games that we all kind of grew up with, really. We all enjoy helicopter vision. We know what's over the next hill because we're sat there looking down on it. There's nothing that's really surprising. And when we line our forces up for battle on the table edge, we know generally where we're going and generally where our opponent is going. And that tends to be the reason why wargamers don't bother to maintain a reserve. Why would you? When you can see where the enemy's going and what they're going to do, you just chuck your troops in to oppose them. And that's kind of the lack of reality you get with that traditional line them up on the table edge type of game. But that tempo really is not so much the tempo set by the players, that's a tempo set by the scenario. Nothing happens till you get to the middle of the table. For the game designer, control of tempo during a game is possibly difficult to achieve, and I'm not really sure that we should want to achieve it. I often describe designing rules as creating a toolbox, and that box of tools, once somebody else buys the rule set, they can do what they want with them. How you use them is your choice. But I suppose that there are some aspects of the game that are designed to happen at different tempos, and that is definitely a design decision. The patrol phase in Chain of Command, for example, obviously is there to reflect what's happened before battle is joined. But actually, from a game design perspective, that wasn't really what it was all about. What that was all about was encouraging the players to actually have a good look at the table before they just lined their figures up on the edge and then made a decision where they're going to go. We really wanted people to consider, what are the key physical points on this table that are important? Where are positions of advantage which have got good fields of fire? Where are good routes of infiltration which maybe have got cover? Where's the objective? How are you going to get to it? What ground do you want to be your prime emphasis when it comes to either capturing that ground before the battle with your patrols in a patrol phase, or how are you going to use the ground that you've captured during the patrol phase to then allow your units to advance onto their objective? So really, that part of the game was designed to be more contemplative, encouraging you to think about what's happening rather than giving you an opportunity to go gung-ho charging in. The selection of supports as well should hopefully encourage you to think about what you're going to need to undertake the task that you've been given. I mean, that's the time to think, I guess, before the game itself begins. Then it's the time to act once the game begins and we're rolling those command dice. But still, the tempo needs to be set by the players. It may well be that I like to start a game off by sending out scouts to have a look what's happening on the table, to try and identify my enemy's positions before I commit my main force to battle. Equally, it may well be that I go gung-ho, all guns blazing. And actually, the force morale system does encourage the way the tempo goes. If I start a game and I've rolled well and my force morale is 11 and my opponent has rolled badly and their force morale is 8, I know that I can take a few chances. I also know that the slower I am in acting, my opponent will accumulate more chain of command points that they're able to then use during the game to interrupt or ambush or hamper my plans. So in those situations, the design of the game is influencing the tempo in that I'm thinking, hey, I want to get moving before I give my opponent any chance to react and respond to what I'm doing. I want to put them on the outside of the OODA loop by putting them under pressure. But there are issues also in terms of game design about how we set the tempo. And one of the things I've actually been writing about for Lard magazine this year is about the importance of avoiding blunt instrument rule setting. And, you know, if you want the game to go quickly, the most blunt instrument way of doing that is to say, well, a game only lasts 6 turns or however many phases or whatever. And that certainly has potential for encouraging people to get a move on. However, it's rather arbitrary and it doesn't necessarily encourage well thought out play. For going back to the example I've given, before I go charging up the table because I've only got 6 turns, historically, I would probably have wanted to do a bit of recce. I would have wanted to find out where my enemy was. I would have wanted to pin them down to where they are so that I can then go somewhere else in order to achieve my objective with as few losses as possible. But if I've only got 6 turns or 8 turns or 4 turns, however many arbitrary turns there are, it seems that there's an artificial pressure for me to not construct a sensible battle plan. Rather, I just run up the table and kick things off in the most dramatic style. Well, maybe that's what some people think is a good game design, but I do think there are other ways of doing it. And I also think that a player who's trying to implement a sensible plan should not be penalised over a player who's doing something a little bit daft. So there are those advantages of high force morale and disadvantages of low force morale, and that does serve to encourage people to get a move on, or it can. Force morale overall, of course, gives a general representation of the balance of what's going on in any game, and that's been true since we first introduced force morale with Dux Britanniarum. And we've developed that idea more since, to the extent that, you know, as your force morale drops now, you there are penalties that go with that. If your force morale drops too low, then you're going to start losing command dice. Your command and control wheels are coming off. So knowing where you are on that, knowing that this is maybe the last point where you're going to have optimum command and control, should really encourage you to get a move on? Or do you decide that you're going to sell yourself as dearly as possible and put yourself on the back foot, taking up a defensive stance in the hope that the enemy dashes their forces on the rock that your defences have become? Well, but again, those are choices that the player needs to make. If the game design is such that it takes those choices away from the player, when to push hard, when to move softly and carefully, maybe taking advantage of your tactical movement to edge your way forward before getting to the optimum position and then making your main attack. Well, the rules would not be serving as well if they didn't allow that to happen. So, as a game designer, we can include concepts within our games that encourage players to make decisions that move the game towards its conclusion, but at the same time we shouldn't be obliging players to do things that were historically foolish. One of the things that we're going to be introducing in Chain of Command 2 is a greater emphasis on the importance of objectives in scenarios, whereby in Chain of Command 1 we had a lot of situations where, yes, the objective was there, but far more important was reducing your enemy's force morale. Now we're going to be introducing ideas that mean that seizing the objective is something worth doing because it's going to give you potential benefits in terms of ending the scenario and winning the battle, albeit not in an entirely black and white way whereby all you need to do is send one man on a bicycle onto the bridge and then declare that you've captured it and won the game. No, that's not going to happen. It's going to be about ensuring that if you do capture that bridge, you've got the strength there in order to hold it. But definitely making objectives important does encourage the tempo of the game to get a move on. If the bridge has fallen, then the enemy needs to counterattack to take it back. And how they do that, of course, is again down to them. There are issues in terms of game design where we're talking about scenario design, and scenario designers can add those ideas in terms of possibly saying you've got to achieve this within a certain period of time. But that normally is, most pertinent when they've got a historical scenario and the situation meant that the objective had to be achieved by a certain point, or enemy reinforcements arrived, or the bridge would get blown, or something that made it pertinent that they had to get a move on and they had a limited amount of time. That, of course, is perfectly plausible, but making every game have that same dramatic cut-off point, I don't think really cuts the mustard. Of course, there is one other area which is perpetual, and I'm not really sure how we deal with this. In fact, I'd go as far as saying I don't have an answer to it whatsoever. And that is the amount of time players take to make decisions. When you're representing the Battle of Waterloo with turns of 15 minutes, one of the command challenges there is that generals are making decisions based on imperfect information. They're not entirely sure what's happening at all points. They're not sure where Grouchy is. They're not sure where the Prussians are. Therefore, decisions had to be made based on what they do know rather than what they'd like to know. When you're playing a game like Chain of Command, where you're looking at decisions being made minute by minute, there's always the issue that players will take rather too long to dwell on making those decisions. I've often thought about introducing an egg timer or a chess clock to say, well, you've got 5 Chain of Command dice, therefore you've got 2.5 minutes or however many seconds per command dice that a side has got at that point in time. But we never get round to using those, and frankly, I think it pushes us towards the realms of that competition scene that doesn't really suit the type of games that we're putting together. So if anybody has a solution to those players who take half an hour to make a decision what to do with in their patrol phase or with their command dice, yes, the patrol phase is the time to think carefully about what you're going to do, but not to the extent that you hold the game up and spoil the fun for other people. Ditto with making those decisions with your command dice. There should be time pressure on making those decisions as a platoon leader, but how we introduce that into our game, I don't know. Anyway, there we go. That's just some thoughts on how game designers can influence the tempo of a game. Scenario designers can do the same, and I think maybe they hold the whip hand when it comes to deciding where the time pressures and constraints ought to be, more so than the game designer. Well, hopefully we'll all have time to think about our gaming over Christmas. But until then, thank you very much for listening to this window, and we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully on Christmas Day morning for the festive Oddcast. We'll see you then.